and welcome. You're tuning in to Unbreakable Hope with me, your host, Jessica Rose. This podcast is all about seeking the light. In each episode, we chat with someone who has either overcome the darkness or who is actively spreading light within their own community. So let's jump into today's episode. I have a very special guest today to introduce you to, Orthneil Kelley. And wow, his story is so amazing. He is a faith-based father who is really just loving everyone in the financial world, something that you may not think of. But I love his story so much of being a father, really changing the dynamics of his family and helping change the dynamics of future families. And we even share some things in common. So I hope that you'll stick around and listen to this amazing episode. Well, I'm really excited to get to know you more. So thank you so much for being here and being willing to tell your story with our audience.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm excited too.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to pass it over to you and let you introduce yourself and tell our listeners a little bit more about who you are, and we'll jump into our conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, so I'm the oldest of seven. So the oldest of seven, I have three kids. I'm married. I'm definitely a person of faith. Uh, I was a missionary for my church for 2 years. So during that time, I was in New York. So I learned how to speak a second language. So I speak Haitian Creole, a language I love. Um, What else? Professionally, I've been in sales for pretty much all of my career. Anything client facing, just sign me up for it. Like I get to talk to people. That's what I like to do. Uh, and as far as like what I do on the side, like I do a couple of things. I own a lending business, but I also own a fractional CFO, like I'm 1099 there. And basically, like in that, what I can do is like come to people and take their processes or take their shipping, or even if they have debt. And what we do is we go in, we provide a service, and we don't get paid until a service has been successfully rendered, which I think that's just like a cool model, like take care of the person and then you get taken care of. So that's what I love about that. Um, as far as like personally, I am ADHD, PTSD, generalized anxiety. So what I've always found fascinating ever since I learned about that is the benefits of having those things. Because most people, people can tell you all of the negatives about being anxious, right? Like your hands sweating or being hyper vigilant. But I flipped that on his head. And I'm like, you know what? If I wasn't so anxious, I wouldn't keep my kids protected. I wouldn't be always paying attention to my surroundings. I wouldn't be pay as much attention to their behaviors and what they do. So for me, it's kind of a superpower because that hypervigilance gives me the security that I know that they're safe because I know that I'm watching them. So there's always a positive to the other side of the coin, even though there's a negatives too. Um, yeah, but that's a little bit about me.
That's a really great perspective. I love that you said that, is that oftentimes we take some of the things that God gave us and we're mad about them, right? But finding those positives, I always joke, I was super paranoid before I joined the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps just heightened that and gave me a real reason to be paranoid. But I too, I have high functioning anxiety. I'm always go, 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 gotta do, gotta do, gotta do. So I can relate to that, as I think that a lot of that has been what's helped me keep my husband alive. Like you said, hey, this hypervigilance has helped me be more aware of my kids and keep my kids alive and keep my family protective and safe. It's the same. Had to go days without sleep in hospitals to be able to advocate for my husband and his health care. So that's definitely a really good point, is finding those positives in there. I love that you can tell right off the bat that you're such a loving family man. You know, you have kids, you're married, you seem to be very involved in your community. Was there something that you kind of contribute maybe your childhood to, kind of building building that part of you, is just being this very loving family man?
Well, I that's the PTSD part because that's the trauma, right? Like my dad, you know, and you respect him on his decision because he had me at 17. My mom was 15. She was 16 when she had me, and he was 17, turning 18. Right. So when he had me, he's like, I can be stuck in this backwater town and do what my friends are doing, or I can try to do something for this human that I brought into the world. Right. So he went and enlisted into the Navy. He was in the Navy for 20 years, so he's a veteran, proud vet.
Okay.
Um, but the issue was I only saw him like once or twice a year, right? So I only saw him once or twice a year, and even though he was engaged to my mom at one point, it didn't work out because of his choices. Um, and so for me, I've always wanted to be the present father, right? I didn't want to be out and about. Like I didn't want to be all over the world and saying, yeah, I have to do this for my kids. Like to some degree, for some people, that's their calling in life. I didn't want to do that. Like personally, I wanted to be hands-on right there. It's almost micromanaging, and I'm not willing and I'm not ashamed to say it, right? I want to micromanage my kids because I want them to know that regardless, dad cared about them, dad wanted, he always taught them the lessons. And whether we liked it or not, he always was straightforward and direct with us. They can always depend on that, right? So I want it to be the total opposite of what happened in my life. So the trauma kind of pushed that to the forefront, if that makes sense.
100%. I actually, my parents were both Air Force, and I went into the Marine Corps, kind of oddballed it, but that's kind of what you're saying is like your dad was always gone and traveling and how difficult that was. I remember for me when my dad practically lived in Saudi Arabia my whole life, and when he retired and came back, it was like, oh, my mom was practically a single mom raising the three of us, and like I knew he was my dad, but I didn't really like know him. So it felt
No,
like a stranger living in my house. And then of course he felt like a stranger and trying to figure out like how do we make this work? And I remember I wrote him a letter. We lived in the same house. And I wrote him a letter and was like, hey, I know you're my dad, but I don't really know you and I'd like to get to know you. And we went on a daddy-daughter date and it was to this day probably one of the most awkward dates I've ever been on. Because I remember we went to eat and we didn't have a whole lot to say because, we're just kind of like, oh, it's great. I don't really know you. Right. And there's that little bit of like being a child and it being adult, almost like I know this is my dad who's supposed to protect me, but also kind of this sense of insecurity about safety too. But we went to go see the movie Man of the Year with Robin Williams and
oh
died
man,
laughing watching this movie. And that's how we ended up really bonding, was over our love for movies. And slowly I've been able to build a better relationship with my dad, but it's definitely it's a piece of your life that's missing. So I can see how that affects, and you said being a micromanaging dad. I love that though, because your thing is that I want to be there for my kids and for my kids to know without a doubt that I am there for them, that I love them and that I support them. How old are your kids?
seven, so seven turning 8. I have a 6-year-old turning 7, and then I have a 4-year-old turning 5. So
Nice.
all this year. Yep. But yeah, it's funny that you say that because that's the same thing that happened like once my dad retired and I started really after I had my first son, like we started talking more, and then you get to realize the similarities because it's not as awkward. And then you're like, oh snap, our personalities are way more similar than I thought. And I'm like, that's where I get this from. Like, me and my dad love cheesecake. We're pretty cool, calm, and collected. We love music. Like, just a lot of those things, or even like, when I was a kid, I had anger management issues. He had anger management issues, and you just see how similar you in fact are once you get together. But that is part of what you're missing, right? You're missing the opportunity to grow up knowing someone is like you, and there's the insecurity there. Like that's what I think some people don't understand. It's like, yes, you are doing this for your family, but don't get lost in the duty, right? Your duty is as a parent and as a spouse first, even though you're serving your country, even though you're serving your clients, like those things are the most important thing. In my church, we have a saying, what matters most is what lasts longest. And your family is going to last beyond the job, beyond the titles, beyond the clients. Like they just will. Um, and so you just don't want to lose sight of that. And that's something that from the outside looking in, from me looking at my dad, I know I want to let my kids understand that. Like, hey, it's important to earn a living, it's important to provide, but your family is the most important thing, right? Sure, priorities will like ebb and flow because that's life. But when all is said and done, where you spend your time is ultimately what you value most. Are you spending most of it doing this, or are you spending most of it doing that? And we have to check ourselves often for that. Because I know me, like my ADHD is very stress related. So the more stress I get, the more I need to be away from people,
Yeah.
right? My people meter is very, very tiny, even though I love talking to people. And so I have to check that. That's one of those things I have to keep in check, or otherwise I'll spend a lot of time outside of work just being alone, just to recalibrate myself instead of being present. So
That's interesting because my church, this was our conversation we had this week. So my church's theme this week is Christian-ish. I think you might enjoy that. And we were talking about priorities, and we're exactly that, how, and I'm guilty, like no judgment, like I'm throwing it out there, right? Is that putting career first over family and often over faith. So the kind of the analogy was, you have these five cards for priorities. Obviously, we have more than that, but it was like, okay, so God, then you got family, then you have career, then you have just, like money and stuff and house, and then hobbies, enjoyment, life, those kind of things. And where do we put those on the scale? And I remember, so like you were saying with your dad, right? Young, how do I can stay stuck, or how do I try and provide for my family? And that was my dad. My dad joined the military, and he stayed in to make sure that we were provided for, so that my mom was also active duty Air Force, so she could get out. My dad stayed in so we could have that, guaranteed paycheck. But I think that's a good point that you're talking about, is something, it's a cultural and societal shift for us too, right? Is career before family, but often we do it because we think it's best for our family, but then we're
our
losing our
family.
family over our career. And then you have careers like first responder roles where there's not this focus on family. So I think we're trying to do that. And there's some great services, at least speaking from the military, that there's some great services that are trying to help engage families and keep families knowledgeable, or more family events, those kind of things. But it's still hard, especially in those roles where you can deploy, or my dad, who was in Saudi Arabia almost all the time. But just a good thing for us to think about is, if we're doing our career to take care of our family, how are we taking care of our family
Our family.
outside of that career? I love that.
Yeah, no, that's I really like that perspective, the different cards, and yeah, because it is hard, like especially when like not only are you doing it for your family, like kids don't understand. You know what I mean? Like they don't understand why you do what you do. Even when you explain it to them sometimes, right? For a kid, it's pretty black and white. Either you're here or you're not there.
Yeah.
Right. So it's when we put it in that perspective, we have to like I think the thing is we have to see things through multiple lenses, because in our panic and our anxiety to provide, we're only seeing through our lens, and we're not seeing through the kids' lens, right? Like we're thinking, oh, if they see my back, but they see food on the table, they'll be all right with that. And they are not. They want to see their parents' face. They want to have that experience with them. They want to have playtime, rough housing, you know, even them being there and being disciplined is better than you not being there. I think that that's something that I wish was more culturally talked about, because you do have a lot of people in the same situation as our dads. And in some cases, you have just like a single parent who's doing the same thing. Like, I have to work multiple jobs because I have multiple kids. And it's like, the reality is we have to have the bandwidth for relationships because they're more important than everything else. You have to make the bandwidth for it. Like, even though it's very difficult, you have to make time, or time will get away from you. Like, my dad missed most of my childhood, so he didn't know how similar we were, even though I'm his namesake, until I was in my late 20s and 30s.
Mm.
That's a huge opportunity cost. Like, and that's not worth it. It's really not. Like, I don't, there's nothing about his military service outside of just him providing for me that I'm like, oh man, I'm so happy and my glad dad served.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what he chose to do. That's great. But it has no bearing on how I view him.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? So that's like, if we could go back, that's what I would really stress. And he had a trying childhood as well. Like, my dad watched his mom get murdered when he was 4. His
Whew.
foster parents, 2 of his foster parents in a row died. Like, so when he was 12 and he was 13, and then he got moved to another one. So it's like the trauma he had to deal with. Um, and again, from my perspective, I can't understand his perspective. So like, there's a disconnect, because from him making it into the military and actually being able to provide and do something that his friends weren't able to do, in that vein, he really has took a step forward with all he suffered. But from my perspective as the child, right, not understanding his mind, when I'm a kid, I'm just like, man, he could have at least took us in a couple of those summers and we could spend some summers with him. But he's not really thinking about that. He's thinking about doing his duty, and he feels like he's doing it well because he's staying in this where he needs to be so that he can provide for his children. You see what I mean? So it's this conundrum, this dance where we don't understand each other.
Yeah.
All right. And there's that space between it. And it's not anyone's fault in particular, because he did what he thought was best. And I'm thinking what I think is best. You know what I mean?
Oh,
So
I like to say a lot, we're all doing the best we can with what we have in each moment. But that is a beautiful point that you make when it comes to the difference in perspectives is, my dad the same thing when he was saying like, hey, I stayed in and deployed so your mom could stay home with you. Like I sacrificed getting to be with you and know my time with you so your mom could be there for you and get to know you and have her time with you, you know? But it's true, it's we still lost out in the end in that relationship with our dads as a child. And I think what's also a huge sign of just love and forgiveness and growth is being able to be an adult and look back and say they made a decision that they thought was the best. And I recognize that. Now how can I try and keep both of that in mind as I move forward with my own kids? And for me, I have a stepson. He's 19, and we had 50-50, so very involved in his life since he was like 7. And he's now in college, but a lot of the relationship dynamics are different for me because I am a stepmom. He wasn't here 100% of the time, but I can relate to some of what you're saying a bit with that connection piece and the family aspect because my husband has brain cancer. Cognitive disorders are not fun. Um, I, I laugh a lot, right? We cope through humor, but unfortunately, there's days where he remembers more, and there's days where he remembers less. And lately, he's had this like just craving that we joke he has FOMO all the time. Like, oh, if you're doing it, I want to do it. If you're eating it, I want to eat it. But he's nonverbal, so he can't really express himself, and all he can do is get angry because I'm just not there. He doesn't remember that I'm gone. He doesn't know why I'm gone. And he just wants me to sit there all day with him and just watch TV all day with him. And then I'm over here trying to balance like, well, I need my passions and my career, my fulfillment in my life. So I feel good at the end of the day. And also I need to have something so if he does pass away, I have a career that I can rely on. But it is that balance and trying to say, I need to make sure that ultimately he is my family. I need to make sure I'm providing and taking care of him and recognizing that those needs that he has while also still balancing having a career and planning for the future.
Oh, that's yeah. I admire that because that for my stress related. I probably wouldn't be able to cope, to be honest with you. Like that, just that was one of the things that really drew me when you about your story, like you're saying. I'm like, man, she's doing this with a smile on her face, and in life, it probably could be tougher, but man, it probably doesn't feel like it could be, and to still be up and Adam and doing to me is like extremely admirable because I personally don't think I would be able to successfully cope and deal with it. I probably wouldn't. I would like turn into more of a hermit than I already am. So yeah, just hats off to you for that. Um, One of the things I've come to terms with, at least from a parental perspective, is like I understand that my kids won't always understand what I do and why I do it. And because being a parent, you need to be decisive as opposed to always being like placating, right? It's just one of those things you have to be. Like you have to make a decision like what kind of a parent am I going to be? And I can't switch because kids understand when you're switching. And if you switch, it's going to cause like it doesn't mean you can't have like dynamics in your relationship, but what I mean is you need to be consistent in your approach. Because
Oh,
if you switch too often, the difference between approaches, they will take advantage of. It's just in their nature. They're trying to get the best deal for them, not because they're mean or bad, or it's just the nature of a child. And so I've had to come to terms with like, you know what? Being decisive to me is more important than being liked. Now, we have fun, and I think they do like me, but if I have to give one up, I'm going to give up being liked for being decisive. Like it to me, it's much more important that they turn out to be good human beings. What does it matter if they like me, right? If they treat people well, if my sons are respectful and chivalrous, if they are kind, if they don't abuse their authority and their power, if my daughters are, if she's kind, if she's sweet, if she's strong, if she protects and takes care of herself and sets those boundaries for people, that is enough for me. I don't need to be, the number one most fun dad like that. Why? Right? Like if they turn out being horrible, citizens in society, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like there's a balance. They need to have both, right? I should be able to have a good time with them, but them to also know like, hey, there is a standard that I must measure up to and my family name is on the line. I can't do anything to anyone for any reason, right? These are the bounds that I operate in, and I want them to have that kind of respect for me. And that's why I say respect, at least for a dad, is way more important than being like, if they respect me, they ain't gotta like me. They'll like me when I'm a grandpa. They'll like me when I'm a grandpa. But right now, it's not necessary.
I think that's something that people forget when you turn into that parental role that boundaries and structure are good. My husband used to always say, I'm a parent. My job is to say no. And I remember a lot of things that came up that he was like, flat out, no. And he's like, even if I slightly agree with it, it's a no because they need to understand boundaries and structure, and there are rules, right? And I remember very different my husband's style of parenting and his ex-wife's style of parenting. And I'm kind of this like middle mediator sometimes in the situation, but I just think it was very interesting where mom would say, "Oh yes," And dad would be like, no, we are completely against this, and having to navigate, well, then who wins in the end? You got one parent saying yes and one parent saying no. But I do see that a lot in relationships with people who have children. Is like, it's okay to say no. It's okay to have boundaries because that's going to be good for them later. It's going to be good to have that structure and that backbone later. Like you said, are you respectful? Are you kind? Are you strong? Are you supporting your community? I love that those are the things that you're looking like. These are the things I want to leave my kids with, you know? Um, I bet a lot of that comes with as you're growing up, you shared that both your parents were in their late teens, and I'm sure that had a lot to do with maybe your upbringing, some of your morals, and even some other stressors, maybe even financial stressors growing up. I'd like to maybe dive in a little bit more to that if you're willing to share.
Yeah, definitely. So the financial side, my perspective on it is because my dad was away and because my mom had to support six kids, I think she literally didn't have the time to truly sit us down and teach us how to do things. So when you look at me and my siblings, we're all extremely independent. Like we we taught ourselves how to do pretty much everything. Whether it's walking or reading or writing, like we had like these V-Techs for Christmas, and that's how we learned how to the letter sounds, and that's how we got really well read. So financially, a lot of what we've had to learn is literally trial and error. Like when I first got married, I didn't understand what a 401k was, so I elected not to get one. I didn't understand what insurance was, so I elected not to get insurance, right? Like these things that I know is essential, I had no idea, right? Like no idea. I was just like, that sounds weird. I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna do it. And what ended up happening is I was living to the limits of my income because I saw the gross pay, and in my mind, the gross pay was that's mine. I didn't understand that there's going to be net, that there's going to be FICA, that there's going to be taxes, and what you're left with, you have to start making decisions based off of what's net of expenses. Yeah, so I didn't understand that, and that caused a lot of trouble. Like, I paid off my first car in 11 months, but I should have paid it off in 6 months. The reason it took so long is because I was living beyond my means. When we went on our honeymoon, me and my wife, our battery died, so we had to pay for a battery. We didn't have enough, we had to get new tires. And because I was living beyond my means, I didn't have enough money to put down on a hotel. So I had to use my credit card for the hotel, but we didn't have any other money during our honeymoon. So literally, like what we did was walk on the beach, and we had a couple dollars to like get some sand castle stuff from the Dollar Tree, literally. Right. So like it's been a big impact, just the ignorance, right? The ignorance itself has probably been the most impact. And then two, because I didn't know where to get the information from, there's like this blindness. I don't think to ask my parents because my parents never told me. It sounds kind of weird, but because they didn't tell me, I didn't even know that they were treasure troves of information regarding these things. You see
Mm.
what I mean? So now I'm perpetuating poor financial habits, even though my parents have lived for decades knowing these basic things.
I could see that. It's almost like, well, if you didn't teach me, you didn't know, therefore I'm not going to go to you. I got to find somebody else. And then that somebody else thing, I I'm guilty of that. My mom taught me how to sign my name, spell my name, write a check out like before kindergarten or somewhere between kindergarten or first grade or whatever. But I remember when I I was in a couple MLMs. I was trying to like start a business, and I took all this business advice from somebody who I presumed to be successful. Turns out they weren't. And looking back, I was like, "Ooh, that was really bad business advice." But then I thought I didn't go to my mom and dad and ask them about it. This wasn't something that they had shared before or talked about before. And I thought I was going to somebody who knew what they were talking about. So then it also opens you kind of up to sometimes taking advice from the wrong people. I don't know if that's the right way to word it, but it turns out to not be maybe the best advice for you. Is is that some of why you got into the financial field?
That's exactly why I got into it. Exactly. Look at you. So that's exactly why, like, I've always been very entrepreneurial, right? Like you can tell I hate working for people. That's no secret. You can ask anyone. Uh, it's not because I'm disagreeable, it's because 9 times out of 10 people abuse their authority.
Mhm.
Uh, and being very independent and being very responsible. I don't like when people abuse their authority because I never will. I never have. So like also, I like when people are competent. To your point, when you look back in that person, they weren't very competent when it came to actually teaching you how to build and manage and operate an enterprise, right? And I've come and so that happened, and I'm like, man, I need to learn everything that I can about finances. And funny enough, I didn't go to a program. I did what I've always done best, having to learn everything by myself or having someone teach me later in life. Um, so I just put on my science hat and I just started observing. All right, so what happens when this happens? What happens when this happens? And what I would do is I would take like my bank statement and then I would go through what did I do last month and I would highlight and I start to see trends and I'm like, I don't really like that. Right? I'm like, man, I'm spending so much money doing this. I probably need to cut down on it. And what ended up happening is me and my wife, we actually have something we'll roll out soon. But it's basically we have our own personal finance based off of our mistakes and then based off of the things that we've done right. Um, and basically, what it's going to be is a template that anyone can come in and take and make their own, right? We don't believe in pushing any person in any direction. Obviously, the basics are the basics. Live below your means, have a budget, stay out of consumer debt, right? Those are essential. Everyone needs that. I don't care who you are. If you're looking at this podcast, you're like, no, everyone needs those at least three things. And fourth thing, emergency fund. Everyone needs those four things,
Oh yeah.
right? We've been in two major financial situations where if we didn't have an emergency fund, we'd be less than homeless.
Mm.
And we had emergency, right? So, but yeah, it really pushed me to doing that. And also like it's given me a more critical thinking approach because if I didn't suffer through those MLMs or through bad advice or through making my mistakes, then other people would continue to make them. So I kind of view myself as like a pioneer. I'm the person that's willing to get a finger blown up by the landmine to let people know, yeah, you probably don't want to step there. Right? There's not a lot of people that are willing to do that.
Mm.
And so I view myself as a pioneer in that regard. And so I kind of take the onus upon me to say, hey, these are the horrible things that I did. This is the advice I had. This is what I wish I knew. And then these are some of my own unique ideas based on all of these experiences.
Mm.
And I want you to build your own personal finance plan. Because really, it should like once you know what you know, once you have an idea, now it's just systematizing it and living that way. And then I'm not going to tell you how to do that, right? I'm not going to tell you how to do that. I want you to do it because it's important for you to get your hands dirty when it comes to your finances. Like that's how people get taken advantage of by not knowing what's happening in their day to day. You should know what's on that bank statement better than any other person. And so like that's really what drove me, just the ignorance, the poor advice, the poor decisions on my the wrong perspective, and then slowly gaining more insight over time. And it just allowed me to be like, you know what? Finances are important, and you need to have a strategy. Like when you go to work, you should work with a strategy. Like I'll give you one principle: consistent income is more important than variable inconsistent income, period.
Mhm.
It just is. I found that if I would have been making 30 grand throughout all of the 12 years that I've been working, that would have been better than what I had, where I had 20, then I had 80, then I have 60, and then I have 20 again. That variable nature of income means that I was moving my lifestyle up for what I thought was stable income, and then the rug gets pulled out from under you, and now you're stuck with less income or no income and a higher cost of living.
Yeah, I love that you're saying like you're willing to help, but people have to take ownership. It makes me think of that whole like teach a man to fish or feed him, right? Is at the end of the day, and that's where I'm with like my decisions. I took bad advice. I'm not mad at that person. I don't blame that person. Like ultimately it was my decision, right? But getting advice from someone, being able to say, "Hey, here's the things. Now look into this. This is what you should track. This is what you should look for and this is what you should know." Because then you're actually empowering that person to take action on their own. They're learning something that they can use, like a lifelong skill that they can develop and hopefully teach their children, and then go on to say, "Hey, thank you for all of your advice and support. I've been able to do all these things on my own and better my environment," rather than saying, "Here, just do it all for me," and then it's fixed-ish in that moment. I think is probably a safe way to say it.
Right. Yeah. No, you're exactly right. We our church has a thing that we say like home-centered church supported. Like everything should be in the home. And I truly believe that that's how it should be, right? Like when you study these business books or even in the MLM, that's one thing I do love about the MLM model is the emphasis on personal development and education. If you never made a dime, that would do more for your life just by following that. Right. So one of those things is just like how the wealthy teach their family. Their children aren't learning these things from college or from grammar school or from secondary. Like they're not learning that. They're learning these principles in the home. And when they get out, it's normal to them. And so I wanted to build a system that is home centered, out institution supported, right? Like the banks, the colleges, they should support what you they should corroborate what you do inside of your home, and your children should be able to go to the marketplace and have a leg up, not because they're better, not because they're smarter, but because you gave them the wisdom that they needed. You gave them a solid foundation, and they should be able to then help their friends. Like, what if friends can't help you? What are friends for, right? Like, yeah, you should be a good friend to them, and vice versa. And I think it's incumbent upon me, even for my friends, right, who grew up in similar families, familiar circumstance, to say, hey, this is what you should do, right? Or this is something that I thought about or that has helped me look into this, right? Here's a couple websites I recommend, and let them go and explore that information. And that's so much better than just saying, "Yep, you're an adult. File your taxes, build your credit." Like how crazy that was when I first did my first credit card and found out that I had to pay money back. I'm like, I pay this back. And then and then I had like a collection on there. I'm like, what is a collection? And I had to learn all these terms and I had to dispute. And I'm like, goodness gracious, this is way more confusing than I thought. Imagine starting out, right? Imagine like your son leaving college and you didn't have to worry about this stuff. He already knows. And so
Mhm.
that's what I've done with my sister. My sister, she just got accepted into Purdue. Woo woo. So she'll be like, if she chooses to go, she'll be about 45 minutes away from me. And I'm just like taking the onus on me. I'm like, look, I am gonna be there. Look, I'm gonna jump, skip, and a hop. I'm 45 minutes away. Here's what we're gonna do. Make sure you keep your part-time job in school. If you have a full ride, everything else is taken care of. We're gonna put this money aside. By the time you graduate, you're gonna have 5 figures set aside and no debt. That's what's gonna happen because I know better. It's incumbent upon me to reach out, and reach out and help my sister. And I think if we all did that more, man, it'd be powerful what we can do to push debt back, to ease everyone's burden and stress. And I know our church, our respective churches do that, but not everyone is a person of faith. So we got to reach out to those who aren't in our circles and give them that opportunity. And that's essentially what we want to do with that program. Just make it available to whoever and give nation to then craft their plan.
That's amazing. This kind of circles back to like our whole conversation, right? Is setting our kids up, taking care of our children, uh, boundary structure, financial structure. As you're talking about the financial things and all the things you've learned and how you're wanting to instill those into your kids, and then wealthy families, how that's just natural, that's a part of their lifestyle, right? It made me come back to laundry. The amount of people that have stayed with me over the years, my time in the Marine Corps, the amount of people that I had to teach how to do laundry, and that just was so confusing. I'm like, how old are you? You don't know how to do laundry? Um, think of what we could do in the lives. I love your enthusiasm for this. I love your passion and drive for this, is saying like, man, like we could really make a difference in people's lives and change our entire country. I'm so excited. I can't wait to hear about this new product and this new program that you'll be putting out to help more people. I love that. It just gives me chills of excitement because these are conversations not a lot of people have. People don't like to talk about money, or they just don't want to. I don't know. I think a lot of it it's one of the many taboo topics in our society.
The more you are honest with yourself, and I think this is really important, like the more you're honest with who you are, your weaknesses, what you're, good at, what you aren't good at, like the more you are comfortable in your own skin and you're not having to code switch based on the circumstance. Because that's a big thing in the Black community. It just is like we have to code switch to be who we are. But the older I get, especially as I've had children, I don't want my children to code switch. I want my child to be unequivocally themselves, for better or for worse, everywhere, right? I want people to know them and that there's not two dynamics. And I think if you really just sit back, it's like, do they really care if I'm trying to butter myself up to this person? They really don't. They really don't. I find that people who are authentic in themselves, I connect with them way more and I respect them. Those are the people who can say, yeah, or I'm calling BS and I'm not going to be mad because they're authentically themselves. They're going to challenge me and make sure that I'm being my best self as well. And I think that's really important is like we don't want to code switch because of the circumstance or because of the employer. We're going to be respectful, obviously. But I think you want to be Jessica, right? There's only one Jessica Rose H. Johnson, right? There's only one of you. No matter what our similarities are, you are the only person who thinks the way that you think and who is who are the way you are. And so I would really, really emphasize for anyone viewing, like embrace yourself, love yourself, improve yourself, but be yourself. Be yourself. It's so much better and it's way more freeing for me. Now I can get onto this and be passionate. Before, I would be so nervous. I'm not nervous because I know who I am and I'm who I am everywhere I am.
That's so beautiful. And I think that's a great summary. And I feel like every time I finish one of these chats, I'm like, oh, an hour is not long enough.
It really is it.
It's so great to be able to learn more about you and hear more about you, and just again that shining spirit of how much of a faithful father you are and the impact that you're putting out there into the world. I'm so glad that we connected randomly through another source, and that I reached out and you were willing to take me up on my offer to be on my podcast. So I think this is really exciting. And I
Thank
can't
you.
wait to hear all the people who are helped through your story. So thank you again so much for being on.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, listeners, for tuning in. If you found this episode inspiring, please share it with someone you never know who needs more light in their life. May this serve as a reminder that there's always darkness in the world. Do not let it consume you. Always seek the light. Please take a moment to do the good old subscribe, rate, and review. Your support means so much to me, and it helps me spread more light and love. Until next time, be kind, be loving, be human, and don't ever let anyone steal your hope.